Today we are talking with the always lovely Emma Maidment. Emma is a wellness entrepreneur. She is multifaceted. She is a yoga teacher. She runs wellness events. She runs the Flow State Studios as well as hosts the podcast, The Flow Lane. We spoke about her transition from going from a place where she was really leading quite a successful marketing and PR career in a couple of different really high potential businesses and moving up the ranks, but feeling out of alignment with where she was going in her life and choosing to follow that call to where she is now, where she gets to be in her authenticity, she gets to contribute back, and she seems like she's very fulfilled and living a good life. We spoke about the concept of dharma, which she gives a awesome explanation of, much better than I could have. And we also speak about her transition to becoming a new mum as well, and what that has been like. Emma was someone that had a lot of ambition in her career, really wanted to achieve great things, and I know that she still will, but how having a child has affected her relationship to her career and her priorities. I hope you enjoy. There's a lot of awesome and relatable information in here, so enjoy. All right. Hi, Emma. Great to have you here with us.
Mitch, thanks for having me.
It has been, we've had a brief 5-second conversation before this, but it's been probably a year at least since we've actually had a conversation. So I'm very excited to be back here with you.
It's been a while.
Yeah, definitely.
Lots has changed.
So I thought where we could start was, for everyone that doesn't know who you are, maybe you could give us a bit of a bio on who you are and what you do with yourself.
Yeah, so my name's Emma. Hi. I do a few different things. At the moment, I'm mostly mum lifing. I have a 15-month-old little boy, River. But I also am a yoga meditation teacher. I do a lot of writing for media. I used to do a lot of public speaking and events. That was a thing. It's starting to become a thing again at the moment, which is exciting. And yeah, prior to that, I spent a lot of time working in PR and marketing. And so I used to run workshops that kind of blended the two. I wear many different hats, but predominantly I now run a business called Flow State Studios, which is an online yoga, meditation and fitness studio with my partner Tyson. And we also do yoga and fitness retreats. And everything that I do kind of comes into that and that membership at the moment, in between wiping up poo.
Yes, definitely two sides of the spectrums there. Yeah, you do wear quite a few hats. I was like thinking of, how do I introduce Emma here? And I was like, I actually don't know how, so I'm just going to let her introduce herself. Yeah, awesome. And so I guess I want to peel back a couple of layers around what your work allows you to do and allows you to be as a person. So I guess the be question is quite a nice one to start on. What does the work that you do allow you to be as a person, and how does that feel for you?
It allows me to be who I am, which I guess in each moment is always evolving, and never more so than when you step into the role of becoming a parent. And the me that you knew maybe 2 years ago.
I'm sure there's been lots of changes.
There's been lots of changes, but like it's been a constant evolution, right? And so the work that I do has always evolved with that, and has always been an expression of who I am and how I want to express myself in the world, but also make that my job. And so I guess the intention behind that from a young age for me was always, I wanted freedom. I wanted to be able to travel. I wanted to be able to kind of, just do what I wanted, essentially. And for a long time, I told myself that I was too young. I didn't have enough experience. Like there was a lot of those stories that played out that held me back from just kind of going for it. And then I pressed go and went for it. And now I think I'm 8-ish or 9 years into working purely for myself. And
has it been that long now? Wow.
It's been a long time.
That's crazy.
There's been ups and downs and different iterations of that. But essentially, it's just allowed me to be me.
Yeah, awesome. That's beautiful. I noticed as you started talking, I was like, I've got the perfect person to talk about like changing in like who they are and who they're being. And just as you started talking, I was like, oh, she's so eloquent with this stuff. I really resonate with what you said around at first really valuing freedom in your career, and I guess where you're at now, it sounds like a priority of yours is the freedom of expression more so than the freedom of location potentially. And I wonder, what has the progression been like in that, in terms of starting in that? Because I felt that same when I was really young. I really wanted to be able to work from anywhere and make, just be on my computer on a beach. And it seems like that value has persisted, but it's changed over time in how you express it.
Yeah.
Can you walk me through that a little bit?
Well, it's changed in response to the world as well. 2 years ago, 3 years ago, it was a very different place in terms of jumping on a plane and being in Bali and working on your laptop for a few hours. And, we as a society were a lot freer, and that was a much more normalized, digital nomading was a thing. And so I guess for me, it's evolved into just supporting my role now predominantly as a mum, in that I have that same freedom to technically be able to work from anywhere. Instead of like working from an exotic beach, I'm working from my kitchen table while the baby sleeps, and that enables me to be able to be home and to be able to be present with him and his growth, rather than, going in and doing kind of a 9 to 5 office situation. So yeah, I think kind of like what you said, the values remain the same, but the expression of it has changed. And, that always comes back to one of the things I do, and I teach a lot in the workshops and things that I run, is understanding your why, and always coming back to that. And the how and the what will continually evolve, and that will be based on, who you want to show up as in that moment, but also how you're responding to your exterior environment. Because I think the last few years have shown us that there's often things that happen that are outside of our control. And as much as you would have wanted to just go and live in Bali and have it be the way that it was, it's not how the world is. So we respond to that, and we iterate in a way that still rings true to our why and our values, but we're also kind of being in the world, and responding to what opportunities and things are available within that. And in the last few years, we've seen a lot of people now shift and realize that they can work online, they can work from anywhere. That the traditional models of kind of 9 to 5 being chained to your desk are shifting kind of on a wider scale. It's not everyone works from home now. Everyone uses Zoom. A few years ago, at the very beginning of COVID, people were like, what the heck is
trying
Zoom?
trying to do a Zoom meeting. Like, everyone's like, what is going on?
Yeah. Whereas like the digital nomads and the people that have been doing it forever were like, oh, come on, like digital offices. This is our jam. So,
it's almost sort of like now, if you don't have an element of that, it feels like awkward now. Like you need, we've become acclimatized to it in some ways.
Yeah, totally. I mean, like people that had even the most kind of officey of office jobs were able to work from home because that's just what happened. So yeah, I think that that's created a big shift in terms of work that's available for people now, and career progression and all that kind of stuff, because it's become such a big part of almost every job.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned that your why is a huge part, it seems like, of how you guide yourself. And I actually have a small story. I wasn't sure if I was going to bring this up, but it seems like it's come up. Was I went on a yoga retreat with yourself in Bali and my family and some other beautiful souls. And you actually mentioned the concept of dharma. And it was the first time I had heard that concept before. And it was just after we'd done a long sort of Ashtanga practice. And it really, you may not even know this, but it actually really hit home to me as you were describing it. And it was at a time when I was looking at a lot of purpose stuff and really trying to find my way. And I just dived into this concept of dharma. And I wonder if you can, you're probably way better at describing it than I am. I'm wondering if you can give me a quick little summary of what that is, and maybe how that relates to your why and what your why is potentially as well.
I remember that retreat, and I remember that moment, and you were like, I'm writing my dharma statement. I've been like sitting with it, and so beautiful. So, essentially our dharma is your role or contribution to the natural evolution of the universe. So everything around you that you're a part of, nature, is always evolving. But because you are nature, you're an expression of nature, your evolution and your contribution plays an important role to the overall greater good. And so when we're working in alignment with our dharma, we're also playing out our karma, which is binding action. So you could think, people say like, it's bad karma if you do this and this and this. There isn't necessarily like good or bad karma. It's like cause and effect. You do an action and then something happens as a result of that. And so whether you perceive that as good or bad is your own spectrum of perception. So when we're living in accordance with our dharma, we're essentially living in accordance with nature, which means we're basically living in this space of service, which then means, this is getting very spiritual, which then means that we're able to then start living in essentially a flow state. We start to experience kriya, and kriya means spontaneous right action. So it's that being in alignment with yourself, that you just know in each moment what you need to do and how you're responding to the world around you. So it's that knowing, like when you're sitting with like, what the heck is my purpose? And you start thinking, I want to do something differently. I don't want to follow this career trajectory, or, you have the shoulds in your head. I studied this, I did this, my progression should be da, 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 da. But you have this feeling inside of yourself, like that feels out of alignment. It doesn't feel right. And I don't really know why. Like, I'm not super clear on why, but I'm being guided to, something that feels left of field. And so you start following what feels charming. You start just kind of peeking around the corner, and then you start to unravel like, oh, hang on a second. There's actually this flow of energy through me that's guiding me to what it is that I should be doing, what it is that I'm here to do, your dharma, like your purpose, your contribution to this whole thing that we call the world, the universe. And so you start to live in accordance with that. And then when you're in that clear state, you're in that spontaneous right action. It's when life starts happening. Well, it already is happening for you. It's just that for a lot of people, they get a bit stuck in the should, they get a bit stuck in the mind, and they resist that flow that's happening inside of them. And it's kind of this beautiful thing of like, when you let go and actually just allow yourself to be who you are, your purpose flows through you. You start to find that it's not about forcing and pushing and like really like sitting there like, I've got to figure this out. It's more about, how can I get in tune with myself? How can I find that inner alignment so that just expresses itself, and I start living in flow with everything? I mean, that's why we call our business Flow States Studios, because it's so much more than just like do some yoga and stretch your hips. It's like, how do we actually teach people how to live a life in flow so that they are just riding the waves? It doesn't mean that, oh, it's all effortless and everything's easy. And there's this, I think, this misconception around abundance, of like abundance and I just have all this money and all this time and like my life's amazing. To be in flow isn't necessarily to have all those things. It's more that you're moving in the direction that your soul's journey is here to uncover. Your dharma is here to be fulfilled. And when you're living in that, when you're in that flow, when you're in that lane, essentially, it's why my podcast is called The Flow Lane. When you're in that lane, things are flowing for you. You're experiencing the life that you need to experience in order to fulfill your soul's journey. And that's when you experience fulfillment in what you're doing, regardless of how it looks to people on the outside or even what you thought it should look like. There's this inner contentment within you because you're on the right track. You're in your lane, essentially.
Mm-hmm. So that fulfillment is sort of coming from you being able to express authentically who you are and in your gifts, and sort of in flow with the nature or the world because of how you're using that to contribute back to how everything is flowing, I guess. Does that make
100%? I mean, we're essentially, we're all one. And, we talk about this a lot in yoga of like, it's all one and like blah, blah, blah. But we're all individual expressions of the one thing. And so our individual expression is really, really important because it's what contributes back to the whole. And so we don't want to kind of be in this like, oh, we should all be the same because it's all one and blah, blah, blah. It's, who are you in your own unique individual expression of you in your body and in your, the vessel that you're inhabiting, and how are you expressing yourself in alignment with your values, in alignment with all these kinds of things. It's like, that's what connects you to the deeper purpose. And ultimately you contribute back to the one, or, the one thing, the collective consciousness, but your individual role and your individuality within that is so important. And I think that's why it's more important to figure out who you are and to sit with that, rather than like, what should I do? Or, pushing this external expression of that. It's like, just come back to who you are and how do you want to express that.
Mm. And I think there's layers to that as well. I think from the outside, it can sound like, and this was my perception coming into it, like, I'm just going to find my purpose, and then life will be easy. I can kick back because I'll be in my gifts, and I'll just like, life will be chill. But there's sort of like, I think there's levels, and each time you go to a new level, there's another thing that props up. So, I probably surrendered into what I was and how I wanted to contribute, and things started flowing for a bit. And I feel like there's been times since then where I've gone back into that pushing and striving and shoulding. And then it's this like, you think you're doing it correctly because you're doing it in a path that aligns with that, but it's still, I guess, out of alignment. And that's where that tension comes back in.
Yeah, because we're humans, right? Like, we still have stories and patterns and karma, like there's lots of stuff playing out that we need to do. We're constantly refining, and we're also responding to the need of the time. We're responding to what is happening in the exterior world as well. And so that can shift your path, or things can come along to be like, hey, how much do you really want this? Like, are you actually really willing to live your values and to be the embodiment of that? Or are you just going to like preach about it on Instagram and not really like actually do that thing? For me, it was like, I spoke so much about surrendering, and I really thought that I knew exactly what that meant. And then I became a parent, and I was like, oh, now I get it.
I was on level 2. This is not even.
Literally, I was like ground zero. I'm great. Surrender. It's so good. And then, you become a mum, and you're like, oh, I get it now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Awesome. So I think that leads to an interesting path around, it seems like you followed that calling, that need inside you to go down this new path. And it's been quite a few years now, and it's been great to see you on your journey as well. But I'd love to hear a little about what your life was like before this. I know you had quite a lot of success in some areas of marketing and stuff. So I won't fill in the blanks. I'll let you say that.
So way back when, I studied public relations and communications at RMIT in Melbourne. And whilst I was studying, I was doing like 12 different internships. Like, I was just, give me all the experience, climbing that ladder. I'm going to be the best at whatever it is. And so I worked for the police media for a while, which was really cool. And I figured out pretty quickly that I didn't want to work in a PR agency. I was like, this is not for me. I want to work in-house. And everyone was telling me, oh, you need, 5 to 10 years experience in an agency before you can land an in-house role. And I was like, I don't accept that. I am going to find a way. And so, I was kind of, working and doing a few things here and there, but I just had my sights set on this goal of like, get an in-house PR job. Like, that was my goal. I didn't really care where it was. It just almost just out of spite wanted to prove that I could do it. And then I got a role within a tech company called 99 Designs, which is still going and still killing it. And
cool business.
Really cool business. Yeah. And that was game changing for me, because I didn't really know what a startup was. I kind of knew, but it wasn't really my scene. And so I came into that role, and because it was a startup, and because it had just gotten their Series A funding, they got like 35 million from Excel Group, which is the same investors as Dropbox and Etsy. And so they were just about to kind of go big. And it was actually a really cool time for me to be a part of that, because I got to come in with a small team. And because they were small and they were a startup, it wasn't like, oh, we'll look after you and give you all this training and da 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 da. It was like, there you go, figure it out. And so you're like, oh shit, I'm totally out of my depth and I don't really know what I'm doing, but I'm just going to keep following my instincts and hoping for the best. And so I got way more opportunities than I would have gotten if I had have, worked for a big corporation or worked in an agency, because I would have, been much more junior for longer. So I was able to just kind of go in and learn all these things. And yeah, they they did amazing things. They launched in I can't even remember, shitloads. Sorry, can I swear on this podcast?
Yeah, go for it.
Shitloads of countries.
Bleep.
I got to travel overseas. I got to do all this like really, really cool stuff within that role. But I also learned a lot about startup methodology and the business side of running a tech startup, which is obviously helping me now in my own business. But that was really, really invaluable for me. And I loved it. And then I did that for a few years, and I got to this point where it sort of felt like my path had diverged into two bits. And there was kind of like, this, I called it like corporate M and hippie M, even though it wasn't technically corporate, but, it felt like there was this like hippie seeker soul side of myself, which I'd always kind of had. And then this like, career go-getter side of myself. And I couldn't see a way to marry the two. They felt like two separate, like almost identities to me. And so I'd like, go to yoga in the morning before work or whatever, and then switch into my different role. And I couldn't really figure out how to, I guess, embody this spirituality and this stuff that I was interested in within a work environment. And it got to the point for me that it just felt like there was so much conflict, and that I started to just be like, hang on, I'm in this job, but why am I in this job? Like, I kind of got this role because I just wanted to like prove that I could to myself, essentially. And is this really me? And is this really what I want to do? And is this really the path I want to go down? And, I got promotions and I was being offered more money to stay. And so there was a lot of really alluring things keeping me there, but there was more of a calling within myself of like, you've learned what you need to learn from here. Your time's done, and it's time to step out into the unknown. Do you want me to just like keep telling this full story?
Yeah, go for it. Right. I'll pull you up.
Yeah, just like, and we've only got a certain amount of time. So I decided to leave my job. Actually, I used my holidays that I'd saved up to do my yoga teacher training, and I started teaching yoga in the office before work, which was really fun. And I just decided that I needed to quit my job and go traveling for a couple of years. And I'd always loved this idea of being a freelancer. And so I quit my job, traveled overseas, was like absolutely loving it. I was running a food blog at the time. I was just kind of, I'd saved a bunch of money. So I wasn't kind of having to think about like, shit, how am I going to like pay for stuff? And then I got to that point where I was like, ooh, how am I going to pay for stuff? I probably need to get a job. And so I was in Berlin at the time, living in Europe. And I started looking around for jobs. And again, I always wanted to work for myself. I wanted to do this freelancing thing. I had this vision, but I got stuck in this old story of, you're too young, you need more experience. That same story that people were telling me as to why I would never get that in-house role was my own internal story as well. And so I ended up working for another tech company because I had, experience in that. They hired me right away, blah, blah, blah. And I was going to work every day and I was freaking miserable. It was the middle of winter in Germany. So it was like dark when I got to work, dark when I got home. And I remember just sitting in this office and just coming home and crying and just being like, this is the worst. This is not what I want my life to be. And I was young at this point. Like I was still in really early 20s. I was like, this isn't it. Like, I'm just repeating the same patterns, but in a different country. Like, this makes no sense. I don't speak the language. Like, what am I doing? And I remember sitting in a cafe with a friend of mine, and she's like, what do you really want to do? And I said to her, I was like, I really just want to teach yoga. And then I want to run like workshops, and I want to have clients and just, kind of do my freelancing thing. And she was like, so do that. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm too young. And like that, all the stories came out. She was like, what? Just do it. And so I was kind of like, okay. And so I went home, and there was a juice company in Melbourne that I'd been just kind of in contact with because I ran my own little food blog. And I really liked them. I got along well with the owner, and he was writing a lot of cool content, but his website like sucked. And I said to him, I was like, hey, I reckon I could help you with this. And I'm like, also, I can do writing for you guys and da-da-da. And he's like, great. How much do you charge? And I was like, oh, so I'm Googling like how to write a marketing proposal, and pitched him a rate and an offering. And he was my first client. And it just snowballed from there. I just started, through word of mouth. People saw what I was doing with his business and were like, oh, who have you got working for you? Oh, this chick. Oh, and it just kind of grew through that. And so for a long time, I ended up running my own little consulting agency, working with businesses in the health and wellness space. And it was like showing me how I could start to marry my two worlds together. And that then kind of further led to eventually moving back home to Australia, moving back to Melbourne, working within that health and wellness space, and also then getting to that point where I was like, okay, I'm kind of done working for other people's businesses. Now it's time to, even though I technically was running my own business as the consultancy, it was like, it's time to do something that's now more of that kind of yoga teaching, meditation teaching side of myself. And so I stepped more into that and started running my own retreats and events and things, and doing that more as my kind of full-time path and leaving the consulting behind. And that's kind of been the iteration. And then starting, at the beginning of COVID, starting Flow State Studios, which is all online, and just, it's just flowed. And it's kind of, I can see it now in hindsight of like, oh, it was just me figuring out how to marry those, what I thought were polarizing parts of myself were really just me. And just expressing myself. It
almost gave you like a unique value proposition as well, because you had this really powerful marketing PR sort of lens, and then this desire for the health and wellness, and then you were able to marry those up, which is actually quite unique as well and powerful. So then that differentiated you.
And yogis are traditionally not so great at marketing themselves. I mean, even now I still run mindful marketing workshops, more within other people's courses and stuff like that for yoga teacher trainers and stuff like that, because it is a pain point for a lot of people in that kind of spiritual world. It's like, how do I market myself authentically? And so, I guess that kind of just became like a little bit of a niche for me that I just accidentally, but on purpose, stepped into.
Yeah. Awesome. Now, I'm not going to keep you too much longer because I know River is demanding, and although he's asleep, big shout out to River, by the way. But I wanted to ask you about, through that period, there's a couple instances where you shared, and by the way, I feel like so much of what you just shared was so relatable in terms of like feeling like you weren't ready, people telling you not to do it, and like just the doubt. But I guess, what was the most common story that was at play for you during that time, or the biggest challenge you had to overcome in moving from this sort of traditional life to a more experimental and adventurous sort of way of doing your career?
Definitely a lot. Even my parents, I still don't think my dad truly understands what I do. Like I'll show him, an article that I've written in a magazine. He's like, oh, you got paid for that? Like someone paid you? And I'm like, yeah. He's like, oh, okay. For a long time, he was like, she's a journalist. I don't know. So I guess, one of the biggest obstacles is when you're doing something that can't be put in a box or put under a label. It does make you second guess yourself. Like even introducing yourself, you're like, what do you do? It's not just one thing. And there's a lot of programming around just do one thing and do it well. But we are multifaceted humans, and we do many things well, and we have many different aspects of ourselves, and you'll express that in many different ways. And for me, it's like I like to play in that work sense with different things that keeps me inspired and interested. So some of the biggest challenges were mostly just me backing myself, and me owning my worth was a really big one. I remember very early on the mindful morning events, before they became a thing that we used to come to in Melbourne. They were events
that became a cult favorite very quickly.
we went for about 4 years, and we'd have about 70 people once a month in a room, yoga, meditation, live music, breakfast. It was beautiful. And when I met Simon, who owned Greenfields, was one of the owners of Greenfields at the time, and I told him about all these things that I did, he was like, how do you eat? And I was like, mostly organic. And he was like, no, but like, how are you funding all this stuff? Like,
okay.
How are you making money? And I was like, I don't know, it just kind of flows. And that was an area for me that, I just was like, I've always got money in my bank account. I don't really worry about it. And he was kind of like, nah, dude, like you need to know if it's actually profitable and be a little bit more strategic and business minded about what you're doing. And so that was a really great partnership for me to actually learn, like, okay, maybe I probably should use a spreadsheet, and like maybe I should start backing myself and actually asking for what I'm worth, rather than, pandering to someone else's budget, or playing that story of, I'm young, therefore I won't charge as much, or whatever. You're starting to see your own value and worth and what you're bringing to someone else's business, and the value and the sales and the things they're getting from that. for me, it was a big lesson of just totally backing myself and backing my intuition and standing in that power and asking for what it was that, I needed in order to continue to support that. So lots of lessons, really.
Yeah. What I'm hearing though is there's a bit of a theme of like almost relationships being supporting you and being a challenge as well, from the relationship with your parents and not really understanding, and then getting guidance from people as well, and then most importantly arguably the relationship that you had to cultivate with yourself just to always be able to back yourself to really do this. I had a very similar experience where I was at a workshop and I kept on telling myself that I wanted to be a coach and a facilitator, and someone like the question that came up that we had to journal on was like, what are you telling yourself you can't do? And that was the moment when I was just like, why am I not doing this? Like I can just stop telling myself that and I can go about doing it.
I could just literally do it.
I could just stop. Yeah. So that's great. I'm curious to know, and this will be like my second last question to you, which is, how has becoming a mother changed your outlook on your career? I know we used to talk about the empire that you were going to build, and all of that stuff. Like, how has going through this shift in your lifestyle, and as well being, with Tyson and being in a great relationship there, how has all of that impacted all this stuff?
I think it's just made me slow down on all of that. I think, younger me was very much like, I'm going to do all these things by the time I'm 30 and blah, blah, blah. And then I think, becoming a mum, and I start to see a little bit, and it sounds cliche, of like what's really important in life. But to me, it's much more important to have time with my family than to be working my butt off trying to build some empire. So it's like, I see that as the long-term vision of where we're going as a family. And we have our dreams and goals and things that we're working towards, but there's less of a timeline strive and a push to get there. And that's not to say, we notice ourselves when we get stuck in complacency of just being comfortable, of like, oh, life's pretty cushy or whatever. Something comes along and it's like, no, you guys, like, you're here, you're on your dharmic path. You got to like keep doing the work. And so it's not to say that you become lazy within that, but I think for me, it's just, I feel it's relaxed me a little bit more. I'm able to just relax and be and actually enjoy the present moment, rather than just being like, I remember being at those mindful morning events. And this is something I remember Tyson pointed out to me when I first started seeing him and he came along to them. We'd finish an event and he's like, that was amazing. Like, you just had like 70 people in a room and everyone was loving it. And like, whoa. And I was just not even, I was like thinking about the next event, I'm like, cool. So next month we're doing this with this person, da, 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 da. And he was like, just take a moment and like reflect on and like appreciate how epic that was and like how much work you put into that. Like he started to make me see that it wasn't really, like, much as I was preaching presence, I wasn't really living in the present moment. I was living, in the next present moment. And so it's really motherhood particularly, and Tyson and all these kinds of these combinations has really grounded me more in the present moment, knowing that everything is unfolding exactly as it should, and the timeline doesn't exist. Like, time doesn't exist. What even is it? It's all unfolding exactly as it needs to. And if I just stay the course, like stay in that alignment, it'll unfold exactly as it should, rather than totally burning myself out and just, which is a tendency of mine, is to just go 100 miles an hour and do all the things and not actually be present and enjoying them, because that's also the point, is to actually enjoy the life that you're creating and to be present to that. So motherhood's really slowed me down in that. And also, you're on someone else's timeline. So as much as, I might have in my mind the things I want to get done that day, if the day doesn't go that way, it's like, okay, I'll do it later or whatever. You become more flexible and more adaptable to the situation.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's great. And I have no doubt at all that this empire is coming as well. But yeah, in that slower and more, just authentic, I guess, way where you can really enjoy it. And I think that sometimes we can lose touch with the fact that we've created this life to be in alignment and to love our life and to love every day. And
Yeah.
then we get so caught up with how much we love it and that we want it to go, and then we forget all about it in some ways. And it
Yeah. And
reminded
I
me,
never wanted to be one of those people that just retired and then starts living. Like,
yeah. No, I don't think anyone wants that these days.
no.
Yeah, it reminds me, as you were talking, it seemed like your relation to it is a bit more like tending a garden now. You can't get complacent. You can't let, the garden go and die if you're not looking after it, but you still need to, give it time and just nurture it slowly but surely over time.
Yeah. And trust that it's all playing out, like, I think that's the other thing. When I was younger, it was like the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. You get the next thing, and then you realize there's only another thing. It's like there is no end. So actually stopping and enjoying whatever the thing it is that you're in, and that moment in life, and also being able to hold the tension in the moments that are uncomfortable, like actually being able to stay. There's been moments in my life that I would literally describe them as the worst yin class ever. Like, you're stuck in pigeon pose and you're like, when is the teacher going to say it's been 5 minutes? Because I am dying. But being able to hold that and being able to be in that, the shadow, whatever you want to call it, when you emerge from that, you see with even greater perspective and clarity the beauty of being outside of that. And so yeah, I think it's holding all of it, the light, the dark, just every experience as this beautiful unfurling of what it is to be a human.
And I think sometimes that shadow as well almost gives us the thing that gives us motivation and meaning sometimes as well. Often like our thing that drives us so much is coming from that place where we've really struggled and we want to help other people as well. So that's beautiful. Now, my last question for you, I'm going to let you go and get some sleep that you probably much need. But it is that if you could go back in time to a time where you really could have used a little bit of advice in your career, what time would that be? And what would you say to yourself?
The first one that comes to mind is actually when I was working at 99 Designs and all of my colleagues were buying Bitcoins. And I was like, that's so stupid.
Buy Bitcoin.
Why would anyone buy a stupid Bitcoin for $10? And now I'm like, far out. Why did I buy a Bitcoin? Anyway.
Everyone
has go back in
thought.
time.
I remember seeing an ad and going to my friends and be like, what do you think of this? And they're like, no, don't worry about that.
Anyway. I think it would, I don't look back on my life and in any sense and think, I wish I had done this or whatever. It would just more be just back yourself, like actually listen. There's a whole other, I guess, underside to my whole career journey is my health journey that was kind of playing concurrently. And the themes between both of those is there was an inner voice inside of me literally guiding me what to do, and I was ignoring it. And I tried to like throw a bunch of stuff to distract me or to do what I think I should do, and living constantly out here in the head, in the mind. And if I had just come back into the heart, things would have played out maybe a little bit more gracefully and effortlessly in the beginning. They wouldn't, I wouldn't have struggled so much. I wouldn't have, taken the job that I hated and been upset, or, the health journey is another side thing, but, I wouldn't have suffered in that sense if I had have actually just listened to myself. Yeah. And so I think the only advice I would have given myself is just come back to your heart and actually trust that and listen to it rather than ignoring it, because you would have saved yourself a little bit of trouble.
Well, I think that's a beautiful place to leave it. Hindsight's always 2020. And
was 2020 that good? I
don't know. Yeah, and each one of those moments led us to where we are today. But I like that. That advice definitely. So thank you for spending this time with us. Do you want to let anyone listening know where they can look you up, or some of the things that you've got coming up?
Yeah, so I mostly hang out on socials on Instagram, which you can just search Emma Maidment, a little underscore at the end. And then if you want to check out Flow State Studios, it's flowstatestudios.com, and we have all of our meditation courses and all the stuff that we offer is up there on that website, or also on that Instagram.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mitch.